literally men are so stubborn. Sometimes they need to be punched in the face in order to feel something. Or, a lot of time, for me, what I thought was great was they would violate an agreement.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, man, like you cannot keep this agreement. Where else is that happening?
Yeah.
And so, a really powerful door opener to those kind of things. Facing a fear, always a great idea, and feeling, confident in the body. It's, but then there were places where I began to reject it entirely, which was Saturday nights, the big Saturday night.
So, Brother Hunter Toran, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Good to be here, brother.
It's so funny. I didn't realize, but as I was getting ready, this is the shirt that I bought when I went to that first Sacred Sons event in Vernon, because I went to the REI store and I'm like, I need a shirt for this event. And I remember being in Seattle. It's so funny that, and we'll get into that event as well. So I think, and I just realized I'm wearing a Sacred Sons t-shirt. So maybe there was like some energy floating around in my head around this morning thinking about this conversation.
Right on.
For folks that are meeting you for the first time, where's home?
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Seattle. Born and raised?
Yeah. No, I grew up on the East Coast, mostly in Rhode Island and Washington, D.C. to a certain extent.
Okay.
And then I lived for about 18 years in Western Massachusetts and raised my kids there for the most part. And then we moved out here 7 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
in New York, Yonkers, New York, just outside Manhattan, and I've lived in New York City. And then I had a chance to spend some time, 4 years in LA. How would you
Wow.
describe the energy between East Coast, West Coast?
Well, the place where I sense it the most is at four-way stops.
For
You
sure.
know, being from the East Coast, I'm trained to sense even the slightest hesitation. So this urge to be polite and non-intrusive on the West Coast plays out a lot there, so I just go most of the time when I sense that. Really it's Seattle has its own particular flavor. I have spent quite a bit of time in California and Oregon as well.
Yeah.
And it's people are in their own world to a certain degree here. I think the heavy skies and the rain make people look at the ground. I've been working with a client lately and trying to get him to lift his eyes is difficult, you
Yeah.
know. Um, so yeah, I love it here. The land is beautiful, and I've met a lot of good people. And if I catch you hesitating at the four-way, I'm going. So.
It's that same vibe as New York City, crossing streets. Like, there's no such thing as cross at the corner, at the intersection. Like, if I'm in the middle of the street and there's no cars coming, you just go. And if you're not used to it, my girlfriend's like, "What are you doing?" Like, what? And I'm like, "Why are we walking to the intersection? Like, we can go. Let's go."
The
It's a go,
way
go,
is
go.
clear.
Yeah,
Yeah, go, go, go. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would realize that I'd be in the sidewalks, and there's people that walk slow on sidewalks too. And you're just like, come on, like I gotta go somewhere. And I think it's the hustle bustle mentality, and it's something that I had to unlearn, especially here and being in Minnesota now. When I first got here, my partner would say, "How come you don't say hi to anyone?" Or, you go to a restaurant and get a reservation. I'm like, Duran, table of two, and she's like, "Ask them how their day was." And there's a thing is called the Minnesota goodbye, which is like 15 minutes to say goodbye to someone because,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
you- so I say goodbye, I've turned around and I'm leaving. And
Right.
here it's like, and one more thing, and one more thing. And so this adjusting to different cultures, even within the same country, is pretty wild and takes some acclimating.
Yeah, and I mean, New York City is really a beast all to itself.
Yeah.
The pace and the sheer amount of human will and story condensed into that area really is, it's almost unsafe to open too much of oneself and
Mm.
and linger. But yeah, I don't know. My hat's off to anyone who's lived there. I always like to visit, but it was always good to go home too.
And for a while, I almost relished that frenetic energy. And I thought for the longest time, I'd have an apartment in the city. It's go, go, go. Every time I would come back to visit, I'd feel that electric charge that you get from being downtown. But then recently, a couple of years ago, I was there for a conference and I was taking a cab to the conference from my friend's house, friend's apartment. And just watching everybody is just, it smells like ants. Like everyone, no one was really smiling. And whether it was the construction worker carrying 2x4s into a high rise, the Uber driver on his scooter, the woman in her like business suit and sneakers heading to work, like everyone's just like going, going, going. It was just fascinating to watch it from that perspective. And I'm like, man, it's just, there's something about the energy there that I used to love and I don't anymore. Maybe it's a function of getting older as well.
Yeah, I think it's also when we become more social in our later years, we begin to I don't want to know if not be offended, but when we see people wearing masks, it's just kind of for me, it's a turn off, because I think so
Mm,
much of what we do, the work we've done, and what I'm moving towards is a vulnerability, and you're not going to find that on the streets of New York City so much, but it is that authentic connection that feeds us and brings us forward into a cooperative way. So, in New York City, everyone's kind of on their dream and their family cell and,
yeah.
whatever beyond that. So, yeah, it's hats off to New York City, everybody, anyone who's trying to make it there today.
As Frank said, right? You make it there.
Uh, Anywhere.
So I'm curious, we'll get into a lot of your journey and your backstory and how we met. But when did you start to become aware of your own journey and started to like look inwards and
Mm,
think about things that, you know, some people never do, and they'll get to their 60s and realize they've never done any self work. They've never done, some of the work we've done, men's work as well, which is just as important. I'm curious if you could point back or look back at a time in your own personal journey. When did the light go off for you? Maybe it's always been on, but I'm just this awareness of like, there's something more to life. I need to ask more questions and I need to develop myself more.
yeah, well, the need to develop myself more, you know, really people ask me this question a lot, and I'm immediately always drawn to just being a child in a Quaker congregation,
Mm,
in a congregation of silent devotion,
hmm.
where it's agreed upon that each and every one has the light of Creator within them and has the ability to speak from that deep well of source. At the age I was at, I wasn't intellectualizing anything, but I was very curious and like, living into prayer for the first time and noticing how the silence itself was rich with this supportive energy, and then I went into the dark days of being a teenager. And then I often say I was rescued by my first hippie girlfriend. It's like, why are you so angry all the time? Like, what's going on? What is this? And actually at that time, my mom was into a transcendental meditation, and I was trained and got my own mantra, and then began meditating and realizing that I could actually have an effect. So that was about 17 years old when I started to live a meditative life a little more. Yeah.
Mm. Who were your role models growing up?
Who were my role models? The ocean was a role
Mm,
model. I grew up a little bit in Rhode Island as kind of a wharf rat,
okay.
surfing, boating, crabbing, fishing,
Yeah.
and then outside of my parents, and this is, part of the root of my podcast, New Elder Wisdom, is like actually it's hard to look back and find many mentors.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was always a voracious reader and an experimenter, got into a little bit of psychedelics in my teen years too. So I would say that the molecules were mentors to a certain degree. And then I would say like the most influential people that I looked up to were actually my father lived in Washington, D.C., and he lived in Shaw, which is right near Howard University. So all around me, there were radical black bookshops. The Fruit of
Mm,
Islam was there. I saw these very noble and powerful black folk during the crack epidemic side by side with what was going on in the ghetto and the great deterioration. So I would say that just the urban environment itself was a great mentor
hmm.
to me as like a more of a quiet rural kid who, I've always been an observer, a
Mm,
watcher of human beings, and being in those environments, being around Caribbeans and Africans, like my father would have his suits made at this a place called Kingsley's, which was a man from Mali
yeah.
who would custom make his suits. And so I would go hang out with Kingsley sometime just because he was so great to be around and so warm and welcoming to me. Um, and, I had a couple teachers. It was funny. I was thinking about in high school, I had a teacher Mr. Caruso, and he taught media studies. And we read like Marshall McLuhan, we read Brave New
Yeah.
World, we've read 1984. And I actually have begun to realize how much he helped to shape my how I query, like how I look
Mm,
at things, and am I participating, or am I just being fed something, in terms of media. And I can see that as like a marker of understanding what sovereign thinking is. It
mm,
wasn't intellectualized at that point, but he made me very watchful of what I'm being shown and
yeah.
told at an early age. And so he was a great mentor. And then I went into agriculture for quite a while, and I had great mentors there, farmers, men and women, just salt of the earth, taught me how to work, how to put in a 14-hour day without complaining,
Yeah.
and just how good a lemonade does taste after putting in a 14-hour day. And eventually, my teacher in somatics, Jamie McMillan, who I studied with him for about 8 years, was a huge mentor. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where it's not built in anymore, right? The elders are missing. So we have to go and search them out. And, of course, my destiny brought people into my life.
Hmm.
And, learning to listen to elders is a whole other thing. So I'm still, learning that and looking at the places where I might have pushed away something that would have been really rich for me. And so, yeah. Mhm.
You've also mentioned being influenced by the teachings of Haile Selassie.
Yeah, very much. Being around Jamaicans and people from the Virgin Islands, and the teachings of His Imperial Majesty came into my life really early, in my late teens. And I was influenced by his autobiography, and also his work in international diplomacy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just his take on humanity in
Mm,
general, at understanding that we were at a threshold time, that we're coming into a new
mm.
age, and that's without all the biblical prophecy and such. But I think he's an important individual to learn about. Mm.
And did you study Rastafarian? I knew I was going to mess that one up.
There's no ism if you talk to them, just Rastafari.
Rastafari.
Yeah, Rastafari.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, did I
Did you?
study?
Yeah. Did you practice? Are you practicing it or?
Yeah, I mean, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I have a conscious livity, they would call it, like
Mm,
your livity is the sum total of how you live, and to live a
mm,
prayerful life. But, Rastas are not unified in their doctrine at
yeah.
all, just like anything where spiritual inspiration comes through. There's groups, there's extremely orthodox groups, there's ones
Yeah.
who are more in touch with nature. I was a good fortune to be around like countrymen, like farmers and stuff. I would work in the orchards a
Yeah.
lot, and there'd be a lot of Jamaicans there. So it's really always been the countrymen that I relate to the most, the ones who are living raw on the land, and really them being an extension of the Maroon people who were free in Jamaica for 300
Mm,
years or something. They were the original Spanish slaves. The English Armada shows up, the Spanish bounce to the other side of the island. They leave all these slaves there. The
mm.
slaves they go up into the cockpit country, and they stay there, and they're
Wow.
free. The
Yeah.
only ones to ever win a treaty from the English Empire.
Wow.
The only guerrilla army ever, and so the roots of Rastafari, and that wisdom is from the hills of Jamaica, really from the Maroon people. Mm.
We've talked a lot in our time together about the importance of understanding the indigenous nature of, the lands that we're on. And I thank you for that, that constant reminder when we've done work together. When did this become something that was becoming in your, sphere of existence, knowledge, understanding? We're taught Columbus early on, and then we quickly realize, wait a minute, there's more to this story. And the more we peel back the onion, it gets sadder and sadder, and we just start to realize how much of an impact, colonialism has had in all over the world.
Sure. Yeah. I read Howard Zinn a bunch in my 20s, so I had
Yeah.
a understanding that this colonial way of conquest was barbaric in its nature, murderous in its doings, so always leaned away from that. But, I definitely came into more consciousness around it. I read, the books and stuff, but it was more like, people started doing land acknowledgments. I saw that and I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. That helped me to dive deeper in. But then I was like, you know what? This is starting to feel hollow, just these land acknowledgments. And
Mm,
realizing that I wanted to bring people more towards the awareness it requires to be indigenous or be steeped in belonging, which is a longer road and is really a unseen road. It's about time invested unseen in the relationships. And, Western esotericism, which I'm, a child of, is not far from indigenous animism. The
Mm,
world is alive. It is a unified body with a myriad of sovereign and group minds within it. So for me, I'm always like wanting to be a problem solver. And I saw this conflict in the culture wars. And, it's like not people were making new rules. You can say this, you can't say this. You can sing this song, you can't sing this song. And like for me, it was just all dividing people,
yeah.
and working so closely with Kale, Kali Kahi, and listening to him, learning from him, seeing the wounds, seeing how it was best to show up for him, and realizing that the commitment needed not to be to the words, not even like the land acknowledgments and the people and the acknowledgments of history is important, but it's really about moving into this awareness that allows a living animism to arise within one's soul and give them,
Mm,
their own direct link to ancestry and creator through the land, and seeing the land as a reflection of creation, which I always have, but
hmm
it began to accelerate more into the aim of the teachings of the somatics was like, why are we doing somatics? Yeah, we want to be out of pain. Yeah, we want to, feel stronger and more mobility, but can we also at the same time increase our awareness so that our intuition comes deeper online, so that we begin to notice more how the world reacts to our thoughts, how it reflects, and how the ancestors speak to us through the animals and the ways that nature moves? And can we slow down enough to not always be taking, but to see how our own cycle of gratitude and praise moves into this reciprocal relationship of understanding,
mm.
and beginning to create culture operatively with the spirit of the land, which
I
is
think
how Hawthorne ceremony came about.
I think it requires a slowing down, and it's something that I'm aware of, being an entrepreneur, that do have that New York go, go, go mentality, or let's get the job done. And I think I'm starting to learn and understand and be appreciative now that we're here on this land. We have about an acre here. We've got chickens now. We've got our own well, and we've got a marsh that's never going to be developed on one side of the property. And speaking of work, my father-in-law was just here. He's a handyman. He's always got to be working. So we built a deck, an extension to the deck, and it was like 4 days of, like you said, like toiling in the sun, and really appreciate that cool beverage at the end of the day. But you don't have an appreciation for that lifestyle until you get to experience it. And you realize it is important to get out and get your feet on the ground, and get barefoot on the ground and be in touch with nature. So I'm empathetic for the people that are in, those boxes in the city, because it's needed. And I'm reminded of it all the time, just how disconnected we are from nature. And I was just listening to a podcast about the importance of getting up with the sun rising because of the difference in the UV rays that are there, and the quality of them, and try to, wake up with the sun. And you hear these things, and think about farmers' lifestyle, like they don't know any different. That's the way it is. But when you've never had it and you've experienced it, it is life changing in a way that you really sometimes I have trouble putting words to.
Yeah, I often like to say that the first way that the system tricks us is with tempo and time,
Mm,
turning time into a valuation of materialism rather than as the tapestry with which we witness the day. And so, yeah, where are those nodes of natural rhythm, right? People always say, oh, I'm out of balance. And it's like, well, sure, but you're most likely more out of rhythm than anything else. And so,
mm.
how do we get back to these rhythms that set the body up into its natural expansion and contractions of awareness and doing? So yeah, it's very important, to note those cycles, notice what happens, how do we change when we
Yeah.
begin to adhere to those cycles. And yeah, one of the biggest favors we can do is to not look at our phone until we have received the early morning light,
Mm.
because of the way it affects the neurology so much differently. The blue light, it's like, wake up. Whereas the sun is like, I had this reddish orange light behind me, but like
Yeah.
people talk about red light therapy, but that's what you're receiving, from the rising sun, and also
Yeah.
just being the witness of transitions. And, This is,
Mm,
when I'm mentoring people who want to be in men's work or human transformational work, so much of the work is about attunement to threshold. You're meeting people at a place where they're trying to come across a threshold of change.
mm,
And so, you asked about mentors. Well, the dawn and the dusk are very good mentors for crossing a threshold, right? And it might seem philosophical and poetical in nature, which it is, but it's also a reality that we attune to what's needed in a human growth, you know, container. We're well served by the speed with which the day comes and passes.
mm,
We're well served in noticing how the light comes to be and mimicking that pace, not rush the process, but allow it to unfold in its own time, and solar time.
mm.
Yeah, very important stuff.
What was the initial draw to somatic work? And I don't know if it was as
Uh-huh.
known or as popular back then, but like, what was the pull to start working with the body, and how did you feel called to that?
Yeah, and, being a laborer, I would say maybe chronic pain called me to it. I had some injuries over the time, and I'd studied yoga in my 20s and some qigong, and I always loved to dance, and I always
Yeah,
loved to move,
yeah.
hike. I was an athlete, a student athlete, and always loved to move with intensity and with softness. And so for me, I was just talking about it with someone, it was 2009. The economy had just collapsed, and
Mm,
I had lost a business and a home at that time. I had a landscape design and installation business at the time. And I was looking, I was like, well, I was not feeling satisfied. I wanted to work more with people and to serve people. And so first I served myself, got myself out of chronic pain. And then, I went to a little known mystery school called the Spatial Dynamics Institute. It was just fascinating how the
mm,
human experience is mapped by the body and repeated by the body, how the subconscious plays out through the chapters that are written in the reflexive motions, and how the consciousness can be refined and mediated through movement, both subtle and grand. And so, yeah, it's been a continuously learning, about it, continuously practicing. And ultimately, again, the motivation is to increase the awareness.
yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to get out of pain first to do that, because pain draws attention to itself
Mm,
wherever it is. So can we remediate it? And soul pain is the same way. When someone is locked in a habitual pattern of thinking and doing, there's always movement that is playing out within that.
mm,
For example, I had a client who had been rear-ended like 7 or 8 times. And it's like, well, what is this about? And,
yeah.
so they were constantly hunched over, their whole backspace just like collapsed and wrapped around them like a blanket. Like,
Yes.
when is it coming next? You
Yeah.
know? But it turned out that when they were young, their father was a violent man, and he would often slap them in the back of the head.
Wow.
And so they had already brought everything forward. And so there was like a vacuum of space. And oftentimes trauma works that way, where a gesture is created that the other puzzle piece is looking for it to
Mm,
fill in that space, right? That's why so many abusive patterns in relationships, they're very repetitious.
yeah.
So, getting that person to once be upright, and then to also expand their awareness behind them, was huge work. There were a lot of tears along the way. We moved through all that had occurred by the relationship with the father, slapping them in the back of the head,
Yeah. Wow.
So all that's alive in the movement, particularly if we're imprinted through violence and fear at young age. hmm
Yeah.
There was an interesting study about scoliosis, and it's the highest rate of people with scoliosis tend to be shy women. Okay, well,
Mm,
why? What about shy? Is that they're kind of pulled out of the world. They've got like one foot in the world, right? Because the world's too much. They pull away, and then the spine starts to form
mm,
to that curve. Whereas to teach them to be present and to look at the world head on, the spine can then begin to shift,
yeah.
and the body can be trained. So yeah, it's always fascinating to me, and learning to read it is a major part of attunement for me when
Mm.
doing group work. The bodies are telling me the stories before the mouth's open.
Yeah, we did a couple of exercises. I think there's one you took us through that was the sins of the father or the weight of the father, where we were, we had our,
Burdens of the father.
oof, that was pretty, I mean, I would, lots of tears, but the energy that was being moved. And I think to your point that I was holding inside, it was like, they talk, the body knows the score and all this sort of stuff, but you don't know. It's like the body has the memory and you're bringing up out the memory and it's being like reflected now in physical form. I thought that was a very powerful experience.
Yeah, yeah. The body keeps a score, is a monument work, was important, but I also think that it's still stuck in materialism a little bit
Mm.
because the body itself keeps the story, right? It
Oh, okay.
it holds a
I like,
story. Even the brain, all this like comparison of the brain to a computer is very inaccurate. There's no hard drive in the head. They keep looking for the memories there. They're not going to find them because they're in the soft tissues, and they're
mm,
actually in the space around us. And once the quantum realities start to catch up with metaphysics a
yeah.
little bit more as a lived experience, they'll realize that where the memories are. Yeah, so that those stories are continuously unfolding through the language of motion.
Mm,
And just to let the people know, the burdens of the father is a ceremony that we do with the men, where the men are on their knees across from each other and their arms are outstretched with their thumbs up, and they hold them there for much longer than they want to. And but while living into this, right, it's called the burdens of the father because, like the story I told, where someone's being slapped from behind, they then carry this burden because you better believe there's something that informed that man to
oh
do
yeah.
things that way. And so we're now carrying this story, which is a burden. It became our burden, but it was his burden before us and how it was passed along. So to put ourselves and say, I will carry this burden for you, Dad. I'll carry it, and I'll recognize that you have been in carrying this thing that couldn't see, and it brought you to do things that were, perhaps barbarous. But let me carry it for a moment. Let me step into that empathy with you and then see where I'm carrying that and what I can then let go. Because right
Mm,
after, when the arms feel like they're gonna explode, we've been there
yeah.
5, 6, 10 minutes, then it's collapse and fall into the mother's arms, right?
Mm,
Fall to the earth, fall, fall,
mm,
fall,
mm,
fall, fall. Let go of the burden, let go of the burden. So it's important, yeah, to find those intensities, particularly for men, to relate the body to the burden.
mm. Yeah, I'm getting chills just as you were going through it, like I was reliving that experience. It's wild because it's like that memory of that exercise is still stays with me. And all you have to do is just bring up that what we're remembering that we're carrying and supporting and that burden. And you think about it just because who knows how far back it goes, could be my grandfather. My grandfather was an alcoholic, he fell off a bus and cracked his skull and died and just
Mm.
and I recently met this local shaman who said that she intuited, she's like, you need to do work with your grandfather energy. See, there's something there that is being called in. And I remember like, that Birds of the Fall that we did. So I think I'm gonna have to dig in a little bit more and see what that story is because I think there's more there to unpack.
Mm. Beautiful.
So when I was looking into Sacred Sons, which is the event and the organization that where we connected, what I remember most was always done such a good job with the socials, and I was looking at them, and I felt very uncomfortable looking
Mm.
at the events and the things that were happening there, and I'm like, you see guys boxing and like doing all sorts of things. I'm like, and then I think at one point I realized, oh, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it probably means that I should be going. That was like the sign, the aha, like, oh, I get it. Like, I'm supposed to go because it's uncomfortable and didn't know what to expect. And it was a transformation. I tell my partner and tell a lot of people that first event was transformational for me because it was just 3 days, 4 days together with other men, which most men in this world don't get to experience in a safe, sacred space where we continuously found our edge. And that was a question, you asked, and a lot of the leaders asked there, like, where's your edge? Let's find your edge. And whether that's doing a 2-minute boxing session with another man, most men probably have never had a confrontational experience like that in their life. And I remember the energy that was going through my body in that moment. And me and Stefan, I volunteered first. So I said, I'm going first because I'm freaked out. Like, I want to get this over with.
Mm.
So, what drew you? You know, I know you had been doing some work with men previously, but talk a little bit about the experience of being introduced to the Sacred Sons group and how, you came into their world and started working with them.
Yeah, so I just moved to Seattle,
Hmm.
and I had been working on the road quite a bit, and so I was like kind of in Seattle, not in Seattle, and then I finally landed in Seattle, and the COVID thing happens, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to kind of navigate starting a new business that requires being close to people and touching them in the city. I had no friends. I really
Yeah.
had nothing going on and was in a dark place. And I saw the Sacred Sons stuff come up, and at first I'm like, "Oh man, look at these guys, like, with their, I thought they all had Messiah complexes. Perhaps some of them did." But I'm like, well, I've probably had the same complex at some point, and decided that I just wanted to listen to young men, and taking, a lesson from Indigenous women, wisdom that the young people will come,
Mm.
wisdom shall come out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, to use the Bible. So yeah, well, I was in a kind of a darker period of my life and wondering where to go with everything. And then, went to Maui and had a transformational experience and, was invited into leadership pretty quickly thereafter. And, you know, it was funny to be a leader, but also somewhat removed and to watch the internal dynamics grinding. I often say like working for the Sacred Sons was like living inside of the consciousness of these four men, basically. And
Mm.
like, whatever they were at, where they were at, what they needed became the new thing. So like we didn't box at all at first. And then like the second time, they're like, we're gonna box and wrestle. And I was kind of like, really? Because I come from a much more gentle approach
Yeah.
to human development. And at first I was kind of like, this isn't for me. And I did a little, I grew up, I know what it's like to be punched in the face and to like, I grew up in that way, particularly in high school. It was a rough and tumble time. And then I saw that it was a really powerful tool, and so, and literally men are so stubborn. Sometimes they need to be punched in the face in order to feel something.
That's true.
Or, a lot of time, for me, what I thought was great was they would violate an agreement.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, man, like you cannot keep this agreement. Where else is that happening? And so, a really powerful door opener to those kind of things. Facing a fear, always a great idea, and feeling, competent in the body. It's, but then there were places where I began to reject it entirely, which was Saturday nights, the big Saturday night, at convergences.
Oh, yeah.
And even in EMXs, guys would do these big fight nights, and to me, it was a totally different energy. And I actually banished it from my EMXs,
Oh,
and
really?
was no longer going to be sending teams to that because I felt it was a little too much bread and circus
Sure.
personally for
Sure.
me. And to me, Saturday night is about prayer, celebration,
Hmm.
and song culture. There is a particular quality to Saturdays that I think is personally think is violated by fight night. And
Interesting.
so finding that balance and being the one kind of pushing and pulling from a place of kind of power. And, eventually, I did leave the Sacred Sons because I felt they were getting a little too orthodox in some of their ideas. There was a
Yeah.
little too much of a holding, and I needed more flexibility within it. But, a lot of gratitude to them. They really fired a shot that was heard around the world,
Oh,
kind of the
yeah.
second wave of the men's work behind the Mankind Project.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, a lot of the orthodoxies came from the Mankind Project, which I believe is a little bit of a limited view of masculinity,
Mm.
honestly. The four major archetypes focused on so much: king, lover, warrior,
Yeah.
and magician. And it's really important, but we are much more nuanced than that. And there
Yeah.
are many more archetypes to explore and to supplicate to in order to understand oneself. And particularly the king energy is the one where I find in the new modern men's movement goes askew of what's needed, to be
Mm.
honest. It's
Mm.
like, how many kings do you need in a room? It's like, we want to be sovereign and control of this kingdom of self, take care of business around ourselves, protect our people. Yeah. But at what point do we lay that down?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to me, that's when we start to come into the indigenous
Mm.
consciousness is I often say, people be like, what do you think? Is this guy ready for leadership? I'll be like, well, is the hero dead at his feet yet?
Hmm.
You
Wow.
know, you know, because then he's ready to serve, you know.
Yeah.
Because for me, like, you know, the masculine hero's journey too is limited. Because at some point, the hero looks around and says, I'm alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the hero is always having to push forward. And so, who is it? At what point do we put that down and begin to walk this path towards elderhood and nurturance or life tending, you know?
Yeah.
All these things are important at different stages of life, you know? I just think it's, you know, I see a lot of men my age who are resisting aging by staying in this king warrior energy all the
Mm,
time.
mm,
And I'm like, well, you know, brother, maybe it's time to soften because there's a grandmother inside you too, you
mm.
know. And then, of course, the orphan. We always talk about putting the orphan on the throne, the one who is seeking fostering, the one who is hungry, the one who is thirsty, the one who is
Mm,
alone. And that those aren't something to overcome, but qualities to approach life with where we're at, which is we don't have a culture of initiation. And, you
yeah.
know, so like me and Kale, we're always trying to innovate. But that innovation is an intellectual project. You know, it's a process of prayer, praise, gratitude, and grief, and a way of asking for help, the fostering, how, you know, it's like you might have done brother death with us. It's like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we got to
Yeah.
approach death. We need it to be mythopoetic. We need it to be, you know, touch the soul. It needs to be lived as a ceremony. So to me, those things come when the king has kind of been dethroned.
Mm, yeah.
Control is not what's needed anymore, but the hungry one comes and sits on the throne. The orphan comes seeking fostering, seeking the inspiration in the fostering. So it's, you know, humans are nuanced, and for some guys, you know, it is. It's like men in their 20s need the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover to find their balance and come online. It's very important. But
Yeah.
what else? It's not the end there.
Yeah.
I don't remember what your question was, but that was some
It's
ideas.
we're just dancing. The What was it like to see these probably thousands of men come through? I just remember a couple from our circles. Like one guy came in a little bit late and he was disconnected for a while. I forgot his name, but we came to find out later that he had been contemplating or he had tried suicide a couple times. And just it was fascinating to see over the course of the 3 days how he softened up and he was just more engaged with the group after. And I mean, you must have so many stories like this in your work, and it almost speaks to how much this is needed. I almost didn't understand how much I needed it until I experienced it. And it doesn't end because obviously you ride the wave and you're at the peak and you come back and, you know, my girlfriend's in tears and because she's like, this is a new man. And then it lasts for a certain period of time and you gotta come back and you gotta kind of revisit it and, you know, continue doing the work. But just wonder what that experience was like for you to, you know, be there for the transition and to see, you know, for some men, you know, see this awakeness come alive in their eyes and in their bodies.
Yeah, you know, it was beautiful, you know, very potent. And for me too, it was eye opening in terms of just the amount of suffering, you know,
Yeah.
of everyday men.
Yeah.
You know, it was profound. For me, it was also very challenging. Like you know, I would fall in love with these men and then they'd be gone. And this is one of the
Mm,
places where I felt this the Sacred Sons wasn't supporting beyond the
mhm.
cathartic at that time.
Yeah.
The integration thing was not in place like it had been. We had something called the brothership at first, which was really good. And then they tried a app and it like crashed, failed, never came back. I believe they have something like a circle site or something now. So for me, it was this combination of exhilaration, of purpose, of continuous challenge, you know, because
Yeah.
men are tough and it required so much of me, which I love to
Yeah.
be able to be constantly in attuning and of course very moving, you know, how much, you know, how many good tears were shed, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I know we, you know, lives shifted, you know, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And it also made me look at what's sustainable for myself, but also what's sustainable within the cathartic model. And what is the relationship to integration and the cathartic and humans, you know, particularly men need this kind of intense cathartic thing. Like I said,
Yeah.
you know, some guys got to get punched in the face in order to feel, you know, so it was a tremendous learning experience, and it's been great, doing things a slightly different style. Now for me, I'm focusing more on the local community and building the long-term relationships that
Hmm.
support the cathartic releases. Because there was a part of me too that was carrying too much.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
with, taking things on. We had our sweat lodges and our ways, of dealing with each other, but we also pushed very, very hard.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that we're all learning, continuously learning, and trying to do better. So the hope, and for anyone out there that's doing human development containers that have cathartic aspects to them, have your integration in
Yeah.
place first.
Mm.
That is your responsibility to do that. And it's not easy, and it's not always glorious, and sometimes it's exhausting, but that is really where the proof in the pudding, so they say, is in
Yeah.
the integration.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the podcast. When did that come online for you? And I imagine you were a fan of them, but how do you
Mhm.
move from a listener to, hey, maybe I can do this?
Well, I mean, it really started with the quality of conversations that I was having on the phone. I'm old
Okay.
school, like I still like every Saturday, usually my second cup of tea or second cup of coffee, whatever happens to be that day, I cold call someone,
Mm.
and a lot of time those conversations are incredible. Me and Kale would have, these 3-hour conversations on the phone, and we'd be like, why didn't we record that? You know, I had some resistance, and it's still like, I've never liked unsolicited advice, and I've never really been a big one to give it either,
Sure.
and
Sure.
so the whole, like, Instagram thing, the constant human development tips, all the quotes and the "I've got it figured out," it really still kinda bugs me to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But then it's like, no, I need to honor and value the wisdom that I have gathered, and, I did an online container, Stephen Jenkinson and Kimberly, Johnson.
Hmm.
Is it Kimberly Ann Johnson? I hope I'm getting that right. They did something on elderhood, and the first chapter is like, "Hey, folks, elders are gone, like just
Hmm.
about, and this
Yeah.
is where we're at in society." And there was this case, and I realized myself being 51, it's like, oh, that's where I'm going. And, I had all this time to lament the adolescent rites of passages that were missing, and like I had to learn by fire having kids and these kind of things, doing it all without initiation, so to speak of. And it's like, wait a minute, we need to look at, like, I need to look at this one. So the platform, it's in a way it is to query elderhood,
Hmm.
but it's also a place where I can bring forward that which has served me, and to begin to take that responsibility of teaching, of transmitting, because that's one of the primary responsibilities of an elder, right? Is to pass on.
Yeah.
And so for me, just like taking measure of what I've been up to for the past 50 years and be like, okay, there's some good value here, and I can
Yeah.
start having a platform to do it. And, so it's still a lot of conversations between me and Kale, but it's also a place where I'm experimenting with monologue, which is a place that I've really enjoyed. And it's giving me, like, people are going to see in real time my learning process, because so much of becoming an elder is about continuing to learn and to continue to go into new places, to take the time to listen to the young people, but also to be like, yo, that's actually not it, guys. Like, let's consider this, and to learn the language of invitation, right? Because this disconnect, if I went out in the city today and just started lecturing young people, we're not going to get anywhere. So, how do we begin to build the conversation that is invitational to the younger generation? Say, actually, hey, I want a mentor, I want to seek elderhood. And then also for men, I'm going to be releasing, I have an online circle space, and where we're going to do some more intensives on about becoming an elder. So it's going to be for men 45 plus who want to
Hmm.
be like, okay, I'm going to take on the fact that I am now in an uncle position, but I need to become an elder is something else. And it's not just about years, it's about something more. It's about cultivating something more than just a top down power structure, but creating a culture of self that people want to be around. And also having the courage to be like, to draw lines, because elders show us what to do, but they also show us what not to do.
Yeah.
Right. And how
Yeah.
do we communicate that? Some people got to learn on their own, but the, like, archetype of the lecturous elder, right? That the kids are all rolling their eyes at, you know, because ultimately they're like, would spare these young people the pain of the school of hard knocks that they've gone through,
Yeah.
but it's not being transmitted in an invitational way. So the podcast, the new podcast, New Elder Wisdom, home of the Council of the Third Way, is really about finding what's missing and also giving me a platform to transmute some or transmit some wisdoms.
How would you define the third way?
The third way is that which arises between two extremes. So I like to think of it in terms of human relationships. For me and Kale, we offer corporate leadership that's called the Council of the Third Way because we learned working together that we can't go back to the Indigenous way. We can't keep forwarding with the Western mechanistic
Mm-hmm.
mind, but that actually something arises between those things that is fed from both streams and gives value to both streams of consciousness, and it's something is born. There's a cooperative spirit that's born out of the third way,
Mm.
you know, like even like utter destruction and fascism or utter collective and socialism would be these two extreme poles of destruction. But
Yeah.
is there something that arises in between those things of personal sovereignty and collective responsibility that is more?
Yeah.
And the third way speaks to what's emergent. You know, particularly men love to say, this is how it is, this is the structure, this is the form, this is how it's done, this is the tradition. And we always want to honor tradition, but tradition has also failed. We have to be real about that.
Yeah.
They don't exist any to a large degree, but maybe they were failing to bring us where we needed to go. And these
Mm.
new traditions that'll be born will be a third way between the human being, suspended between the cosmos and land. So the human being themselves, I see as a third way. We are spirit born and earth formed,
Mm.
right? So, and we have to be the bridge between these worlds in order for those things to work together so that the
Yeah.
earth and the cosmos can work together through the human being. And it is emergent, it's ever changing, it's mercilessly loving and free. So
That's beautifully said. Thank you. So how have you grown, or what have you seen come alive for you in this role as a podcast host? You know, because you have to hold space, you have to sort of direct the energy of the conversation. And I think that's why I keep doing the show, because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me active and more curious and asking better questions. And I'm curious in the time and the episodes that you've done, what you've seen come alive for you.
you know, the more deeply heart connected I can get with the person, the more what is needed to come forward does. You know, I generally don't write questions, but just one word themes on my
Yeah.
notebook, you know,
Yeah.
and then I try and practice good listening like you're doing today, you know, like
Yeah.
how this conversation is evolving. That is being in service to the third way. There's what
Mm.
I want to know about the person, there's what the person wants to transmit, and then there's what arises in the actual, you know, commitment to listening and emerge, having the conversation emerge over time.
Yeah.
So it's been helping me to refine that to a large degree. Yeah, it's been great.
I remind students and clients in a podcast conversation, there's three people involved, and this, which speaks to the third way, but it's for me, it's the host, the guest, and the listener. And it's singular because there's one person with their headphones on listening to our conversation, you know, when it's published. And I'm always conscious of that because I'm like, we're bringing them on. And I always want it to feel like we're in the pub, you and I have a conversation, and someone's just kind of peeking in saying, hey, mind if I join you and just listen in and just pull up a chair and just join in the conversation. So I'm always like, I feel like I'm a steward of that energy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing that conversation forward. But keep an eye on the time, and I want to be conscious and I'm just grateful of the time we've spent together. I got a couple of questions before we wrap up, but I just want to like also publicly thank you for the time I've got to spend with you. I was lucky enough to have you as the leader for my circle when we did the MX. And then when I showed up at Convergence and they start handing out the bandanas, they're like, you got green. And I'm like, what's that? That's Hawthorne Clan. I'm like, who's that? I'm like, that's Hunter. I'm like, you know, part of you is that like, oh, I want to work with someone else. And I'm like, well, I think I'm called to work with Hunter again. So we got to spend another magical 3 or 4 days together. And they've all been transformational experiences. And I really, respect and honor the work that you do and the transmissions you've brought forward. So I just want to, publicly acknowledge that and thank you for the time we've got to spend together.
Mm. I appreciate that, man, and you're welcome. And I was so glad you did choose to be with, because what a time that was, right?
Both groups were so powerful. Yeah,
We're in LA, and those initial attacks in Israel's go down, and
that's right.
we just happen to have a Palestinian and an ex-IDF soldier in our group,
Wild. It was so wild.
right? So we were really, had an opportunity to live into that in a bunch of different ways, and
Yeah.
it definitely challenged me beyond what I thought I was capable of holding. I
Yeah.
found that I was capable of holding, and there's, still a lot to learn and move with. But that was a very, very potent container.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for holding that space. That couldn't have been, I'm sure that's not what you were expecting. And but you were called to that, Spirit called you to be that person, so that's what happened.
Right. And so what do? We moved into burdens of the fathers, right? Because that's exactly what it is
Oh,
over
wow.
there. Everybody carrying the burdens of their
Yeah.
fathers, and transmitting it in a less than progressive way. So, yeah.
What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Something I've changed my mind about recently. That's a really good question. I've changed my mind about influence and skill being equatable
Mm.
in and of themselves.
Mm.
I used to really equate influence to that there must be a lot of skill involved here.
Yeah.
And I've changed my mind about that. And, I've also changed my mind about aging,
Yeah.
and it was something that I feared all along. I remember like when I had a very coppery red beard, and in the beginning I'd like, oh, there's one gray hair, like pull it out, You're
Same.
like,
Yeah.
oh, what are the wrinkles? Like it's like, oh shit. And now it's like I really am savoring the age I'm at and have a beautiful curiosity about where it's going. And so I would say I've changed my mind that I don't want to get old. And I want to get eld more than old,
I like that.
So, yeah. So that's something I've changed my mind. That's a great question.
What's the most misunderstood thing about you?
Oh, probably that I'm, like tense and fiery all the time. I think a lot of people look at me and, I'm definitely, receive a lot of projection.
Yeah.
I could probably make that easier on myself by getting a haircut, but then I don't want to. So, yeah, I think people don't understand the capacity of gentle presence that I have cultivated, and the amount of time that I put into cultivating who I am.
Well, I can vouch for your lightheartedness because we did get to spend some time dancing after the MX, and I think I forgot Parongi, I think, had come through, and
Oh, yeah.
we all went there, we jammed out, and I got to see your dance moves, and I can definitely vouch for them. And as someone who grew up DJing, like house music is my first passion.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, I love DJing. I've still got my vinyl here. I jam out. It's one of those things that really feeds my soul, and so I've always felt it's one of the best ways that I move energy, dancing. Like, so it would be in the clubs, and as I DJ, like moving the energy of the crowd. And so it was just fun to see and just connect with you at that level as well, because there's something interesting about, you can tell a lot about a person, and I think about in terms of how they dance and how they embrace music. And you can see just the free flowing nature and the wildness that's in your heart come through, which I love to see. So it was nice to share that space with you as well.
Yeah, let's do that again.
Yeah,
That,
for sure.
that was really fun. I really danced my ass off that night. That was a great night.
That was a good night. Well, I mean, I feel like we could talk for several hours, and I just want to maybe tee that up for a future conversation. But I just wanted to just love the opportunity that I have, that by virtue of you having a podcast, I can invite you on and we can have this conversation. But it was really just an excuse for me to just spend more time with you. And I always say, like, if you're podcasting and you look at the calendar and you're not excited about an upcoming interview, then you're probably not doing the right show, because, I try to have people on here and have conversations that make me excited, because by virtue of that extension, then the listener will feel that as well. So yeah, I just want to thank you for the time and sharing your elder wisdom with this community. and continuing to do so. I think you're doing very important work, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-ups because there's some stuff that I'm interested in. But thanks again for your time. The podcast is The New Elder Wisdom. We'll be sure to have all those links in the show notes. But thank you, and I appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on. I look forward to more, Harry.
Sounds good.